Sports YouTube Network. He's Derek Gunn. I am Rob Ellis, hanging out on this Friday. All right, we will continue the Sixers talk as we are joined right now by the man who covers them for The Athletic, and you can follow him on Twitter at Rich_Hofmann. That would be Rich Hofmann. Rich, welcome to the show, man. How you doing?
I'm good, guys. How are you?
I'm good, man. Rich. Good to see you. Pretty eventful, couple days, including today. Keith Pompey, one of your colleagues, throws out the story that, mutually, there is interest in James Harden going back to the Rockets. This is not leverage, according to Keith, for the Sixers to get their deal up. What are you hearing, Rich? What do you believe? What is real? What isn't? What is a smokescreen? How do we sift through this stuff?
I think the hard thing about this, Rob, is that James Harden is not really leaked exactly what he wants to do. He has been the hardest person to read in all of this. I know that Houston all season has thought, and frankly, NBA people have thought all year that he's going to go back to Houston. Sixers think they're getting him back. They've said all year that they're gonna give him a lot of money, and that's the plan. And Daryl Morey even said it publicly a couple of days ago that that's scenario A is how he described it. So I think the money matters here more than it has in the past. Like James Harden, the last two times he has left teams, he's basically quit on them. He basically quit on them and then just moved on to another team.
Including the team that seems to want him back, Rich. Like, what is that? They're okay with the way that he went out there, which was, awful, frankly.
Yeah, and it's hard to understand why. I mean, I guess from his standpoint, like if he really likes living there and his family is there, like, okay, more power to you, I guess. From a basketball standpoint, it doesn't seem to make sense for either him or them. Like they're not even close to contending. He says after the season's over, I want to compete, all those things. And you have the Sixers who, I'm not sure automatically should be giving him a contract anyway, in terms of long-term planning, but they're at least the type of team that would give him a contract, right? You're trying to win right now. Maybe you give him a long-term contract. First year, first 2 years are okay. Last two, that's the price of doing business with players this old and kind of trying to be a win now team. But Houston is not in that scenario. So, we'll see, guys. I mean, I do think the money matters more this time, I guess is the point I was trying to make. Like he talked a lot about the sacrifice he made this year. And I think as the Sixers lost their grip on that series and after it was over, it became more apparent that he was like, all right, I did all of these things where I did take less money, and to his credit, he did for one season. I guess he ceded some control of the offense. I don't know exactly what that means. Like he had the ball in his hands the entire game. I guess because he led the league in assists to Joel, that is not the, I believe Chris Haynes called it basketball freedom that he is looking for. I guess this is like a long-winded way of saying, I thought what he did this year, for the most part, I was pretty high on. Like I thought he was like a third-team All-NBA level player. He played his role really well. But just listening to him talk in the past couple of weeks, you wonder, I'm not sure if he's feeling this going forward. If he felt this was completely worth it, is that a leverage play? Maybe. Because, look, this is different. He straight up quit on the last two teams. This is different. He didn't play well in the last two games, but I thought he played hard for the Sixers for him the entire time. So we'll see. I definitely think he wants the 4 years, and that's going to be a big part of it. And I guess the thing that I would like to know is what type of offer is Houston going to give him? I think the Sixers would offer him a decent amount of money here. I think it will come down to money a little bit.
I agree with you. I believe money is his ulterior motive only because of his age, and this is probably the last big contract he's ever going to get, which is understandable to a certain degree. But James Harden had two great games in this Boston series, the game 1 and game 4. But for the most part, when you look at him shooting less than 22%, in the other games the Sixers lost, James Harden historically has come up small ball in playoff scenarios. Now, I want to get your expert opinion. What's the advantage of bringing James Harden back at this point if this team has capped in terms of, with the nucleus of Harden and Embiid, they still can't get past the second round 3 years in a row now? So what's the advantage of bringing him back other than maybe to put people in the seats?
The advantage is, and look, it's a hard sell. I think this is why Daryl Morey's offseason, I don't think any of these answers are going to be satisfactory to the fan base, are going to make you feel good. Like, I'm just going to say right away, And frankly, because of that, I don't exactly know what the right answer is. But the argument for bringing Harden back is, okay, they had the ball up 2 with 4 minutes and 30 seconds left, about to knock those guys out in game 6. They did come pretty close. Unfortunately, it's harder to say we came close because they did legitimately come close, but then they got their butts kicked in the game that matters. So it's that's what makes it a tough sell. But that's the sell, that if James Harden leaves, they're only going to have $10 million in cap space around that. So you're not going to be able to replace him. Now, there might be a benefit in future years. They have some money coming off the books next year, but then we get into, okay, what's the point of having Joel Embiid here if you're not going to go all in every single year? So guys, there are right answers. There are no right answers here. I think you make your educated guess, but I also understand the other side of it too, where it's do you want to give James Harden a 4-year contract? Because again, I was pretty high on what he did because he gave you the 2 games where he played great. That was incredible. And the nature of his game is so high variance, where he's just terrific or he's terrible, and there's really no in between. And you almost got through what I thought would have been maybe the hardest series because he gave you the 2 great games. But moving forward, I don't think he's giving you the 2 great games again, right? I think as a 34-year-old, he's going to probably trend more towards the bad games. He's probably not going to reach those highs. But the reason to re-sign him is you will be a better team next year. Now, does that mean you're a championship team? It's hard to make that case after what we just saw, but that's the case.
Rich, specific to Morey, look, he's never shied away from talking about his fondness for Harden. I guess my question for you would be, do you believe maybe the steam, and whether this is real or not, the steam that's picked up on the Houston side of this thing is because Morey said to them, hey, look, guys, I want James back too, but I can't go 4 years, 200 and I don't know, fill in the blank, whatever it turns out to be, 220 million. Do you think that's kind of what it was that sort of spurred this? Or do you think we're just in the early stages and there's going to be a lot of this kind of stuff?
I think there's going to be a lot of it. It's silly season, Rob, right? And there's things are leaked and narratives form for different reasons. Look, I think there's a chance he just goes back. There's a chance he just wants to, but I definitely think the money matters. And I would understand that even though Daryl Morey is really fond of James Harden, he's somebody who's negotiated hard on contracts in the past. He would hand out a full max to a 26-year-old James Harden and understand that. But Daryl Morey's a smart guy. He knows how old James Harden is as much as he likes him. And, after James Harden took the pay cut this year, he clearly wants, I think, that one big last contract. So we will see how that goes. But I certainly think this is different from his past scenarios because I think the money matters here. I do. And I'm not even blaming James Harden on that. That's fine. This is probably his last chance to cash in. But it's different. The last 2 times he just wanted out of those places. He just was I'm sick of playing here. I want to go there. And I'm not sure it's quite that straightforward that this time. That might be the case at the end of it where, okay, look, the leaks have been Houston and that is where he ends up next year. But I think the scenario, the team he played for, how he played this season, it's just a little bit different of a scenario than it has been in the past.
Hey, Rich, I brought this up to Rob a short while ago. The traditional big man in the NBA, as we once knew it, doesn't exist anymore. When you look at how the bigs play the game now, we know Joel is considered the most dominant big man in the game, but most other centers don't play the game the way he plays it. Is there any value at this point of moving a James? Moving Embiid and basically rebuilding this thing at this point?
It's a good question, Derek, and it's a fair one, I think, considering his playoff history. It's what a roller coaster of emotions for him. He gets the MVP at the start of that series, and he played really good defense for a lot of it. But that Game 7 is a black mark on the rest of his career. I completely understand the sour taste that left in people's mouths because let's be real, guys. He has not had a good playoff career, and for a lot of it, he's been the bystander. He's been the guy, the second guy on the side where people, as the Sixers are ruining their seasons and they're flaming out of the playoffs, there's always the tire fire to the side of him. And rightfully so. There's Ben Simmons 2 years ago. There's Harden was a disaster in that Heat series last year. So you can always kind of point to one thing or another thing. This one was his fault. Like, this was bad. Like, that was, and when you combine that with the lack of success he's had, I think it's fair to wonder, like you mentioned, like a big man, can he play at that elite level in the playoffs? I think they are going to keep him until he asks out, though. So this is more of a thought exercise. But the other reason I think they're going to keep him is that they don't own their picks, Derek. Like, I think part of the reason you trade a star and reboot, like, it could make some sense. You'd be like, all right, well, we've ran out of steam, and I think you could get an incredible haul of picks from somebody else. Picks, players, whatever. Like, you guys have seen the trades recently. Like,
look at Gobert.
I mean, I was going to say KD, but Gobert is like not even close to as good as Joe.
No.
And you know, so the teams are giving up their entire drafts for 5-6 years, which is good because let's be real. If you trade Joel to another team, you're banking on the picks like 3 years down the line because those teams aren't going to be bad for a while, probably, unless there's some injury that happens. Because you were trading them, the MVP of the league. There's a reason the Sixers win 50 games every year. It's him. So that's part of it. But the problem is the Sixers, they owe these two lightly protected picks. And, you know, if it was just one of them, like there's one to Brooklyn from the Simmons trade. I believe it's in 2027. That's like top 8 protected. That one, it's like, okay, like I think you could work around that. That wouldn't be a huge obstacle, but they have a pick 2 years from now in 2025, where I believe if it doesn't fall in the top 5, it goes to Oklahoma City. And that's from the Al Horford, Danny Green trade. And it's just like that. I guess that's my issue is that if you try and rebuild, part of it is you get all the picks, you get, you know, the assets, you replenish the cupboard, all of those things. But your best asset often is your own pick and getting in the lottery and trying to pick at the top of the draft. And it's complicated. I would guess that Daryl and the front office is looking at that. And I think they want Joel to stay for as long as possible, but especially for the next 2 years, because I just think it's untenable to tank in the next. Also, this next draft is not considered to be a very good one either.
Okay.
There's no Wemby in this next draft. So I think Joe is staying around as long as he does not make a big stink and becomes an issue here.
So, Rich, the earlier in the week shoe to drop was Doc Rivers. I don't think anybody was surprised, especially, you know, Harden gives him the tepid, you know, our relationship is okay. In your estimation, how much of this was on him versus players disappearing, going into witness protection in a game 7? Like should he have been fired, or is this a classic case of we can't fire the players?
I think it was a classic case of we can't fire the players. But the one thing I will say is I don't think this series was really Doc's fault. And as I don't know, I've talked to you guys long enough. I am, as much as I enjoy the X's and O's and the coaching part, like I've talked to enough people around the league. Daryl said it the other day at his press conference. I think the X's and O's element of this gets overrated. Like it's do the players like you? Do they play hard for you? Is such a big part of this. That said, I do think it was time for him to go. Like I just think it's mainly a results-based business here. Like you get 3 chances with Embiid at its best. You don't make it past the second round at all. I get it. Time to move on, right? Like 3 shots and out. And that's kind of how I look at it. That said, it is ironic, and it is kind of why I think the coaching discourse is kind of screwed up here. I thought he was pretty good in that series, right? They won the first game without Embiid. They did some good things with the pick and roll. They could not solve the double big lineup at the end. That was the one thing Doc couldn't solve. I don't know if he really had the personnel to solve it. I'm not sure if that was possible. And it's like you said, the players, I certainly don't hold that game 7 against him. Like at some point, Joel Embiid and James Harden have to show up in the biggest game of their lives. Like, come on, what are you doing? Not the biggest game of James' life, but probably the biggest game of Joe's life, honestly. And to not give the effort, he just wasn't there. That's not on Doc Rivers. And so you have a situation where you have Joel Embiid after the game saying, I think he should be back. And you have Daryl saying he was shocked that he was fired. Well, it's like, dude, that's a little bit on you, right? You need to play better in the biggest games. And that's a way to keep him around. So I guess that's like a long way of saying, I don't really think this series was his fault. I think he did a pretty good job. Part of the reason they exceeded expectations was I thought he did a pretty good job, especially in the games they won. But it's time to go, I think is the way I did it. And, you know, I don't really see the risk in bringing in a new voice is the way I would put it. But ultimately, it's really just a results-based business, guys. I thought Doc did fine. Like he got the guys to play pretty hard for him. Just didn't work out. And you need to produce at some point.
Rich, I'm going to ask you this because I asked Rob this also, and I was thinking about this as we traveled down the rumor mill since the disastrous Game 7. So after Game 7, we hear Harden say his relationship with Doc is it's okay. That's not a ringing endorsement. Number one.
No.
Number two, we hear rumors that possibly Harden helped get Doc fired. And so I'll ask you this. I want to hear your perspective. Is it possible? And I understand the relationship between Morey and Harden. Is it possible that Harden had more clout with his organization than the franchise MVP player? Is it possible?
Well, I mean, part of it would be, I think it is possible, but part of it is he has more leverage if they really want him back, right? Joel Embiid is signed for a long time here, right? And James Harden is not. And it's like we said earlier, Gunnar, like they don't have a chance to replace him. So is there a situation in which, and I use this word, I believe, when Brian Colangelo got hired, when Jerry Colangelo said, okay, I'm going to step away. And guess who the new guy is? Oh, it's my son. Optics is the word I would use. And the optics were really bad in that situation. And if there is a situation where in a couple months, James Harden is back here on a big deal and Mike D'Antoni is the head coach. And Mike D'Antoni is somebody who I certainly deeply respect, is like a complete visionary in terms of what he has done for basketball. There are a lot of people who have won titles who have not had 1/10 of the imprint on the way basketball is played now than Mike D'Antoni. But man, the optics would be pretty rough if that is what happens. All that said, that James Harden, looking for basketball freedom, gets the guy who was in Houston, who let him play James ball, is one way to put it, where he had the high usage rate and could shoot whenever he wanted. I think that would be tough. So I guess we'll see how it goes. But Gunnar, the other thing is too, I've been thinking about this, is you have Joel Embiid mad that Doc Rivers got fired, but there's also, I think, a legit chance James Harden walks. So it's kind of like, it's almost like the worst of both worlds here, where, maybe look, and I think Joe will get over it. Like, I think Joe liked Doc because he put him at the elbow and he ran the offense through him. Like Joel, in the 3 seasons under Doc, he came in second in MVP all those years. Those were his best years. Now, I think he deserves the lion's share of the credit, he himself, but as Doc was certainly not getting in his way to accomplish those goals. So that's kind of the way I see it.
Do you find it strange, Rich? And I'm not saying you have to get his blessing on everything, but he also, Morey, the other day said, hey, ultimately we're not looking for players, input here. I'm paraphrasing it with a coach. So, he's still holding grudges about Jimmy Butler. He's ticked off that Doc gets canned. He may not be consulted if D'Antoni comes in where it's a clear Harden play. At what point does Joel say, look, man, I know I've had a love affair with the fans, but I'm ready to say bye-bye too?
Yeah, I mean, I think if those things happen, then you have to wonder. But the other issue, Rob, is that he could potentially say that if Harden leaves, because then you look around and you say, okay, like I really want to win a title, and I have, Tyrese Maxey's good. He's good. Like we
Tobias Harris, maybe, who knows?
And maybe
if
I stick around, we could pivot next year, and we'll have a bunch of cap space. Cap space, not what it used to be, though. The star players get moved via trade now for the most part. People don't wait until free agency. He could look around and be like, "There's not a lot here." I could. Let's say they were able to sign another decent guard. Like maybe they were able to sign a D'Anthony Melton type with whatever money that they got rid of with Harden. Maybe they get a couple picks from Houston for a sign and trade of some sort. I don't know why Houston would do that. They have the cap space to sign him outright. But I think Joe would look around and be like, okay, I could be really good again. Maybe we're like a 5 seed or something like that, 6 seed, something like that. Maybe we can win a series. But I think you're running into, okay, like Harden won us 2 games in a playoff series. Maxey was up and down as well. Is he ready to be the number 2 on a team? So basically, I think if you look at it either way, right? If Harden comes back and everything's catered to him, that could be an issue. Or if Harden leaves and there's just not a lot here, that also could be an issue. And I think it's worth noting, though, that Joe said afterwards that he wants Harden back. And I think he realizes, if this is his best shot right now, like they made it work. And I don't know. I guess that's the tough thing about this, guys. Like I thought for most of the year, they made it work pretty well. Whatever issues there were behind the scenes, Harden's insecurities, whatever, just insecurity is probably the wrong word. Just not feeling the situation. They made it work. Like, they had the best offense in the league for the past 4 months. They almost got past Boston, but it's clear that once you lose, once, the season's over and you don't accomplish the goal you're looking for, some of the truths start to come out. And for the Sixers, it's been an interesting week. I wouldn't say it's been positive in that front.
Rich, would you make a concerted effort to try to move Tobias? And if so, what's his value for a return?
Yeah, I wonder if that's possible now, Gunnar, because for a lot of the time, he's a good player. Obviously, he's got his faults, the layup shooting, all of those things. Like, he certainly has his good games, though. Like, he closed out Brooklyn. He certainly is capable of that. But the issue is just the contract, right? Nobody wants 3 years, $120 million on their books, whatever it was. And now it's 1 year, right? And expiring contract, the value isn't quite what it used to be. But I wonder if there was a thought last offseason when he had 2 years left, which, not too different, that they would be able to trade Tobias and break him up into two perhaps lesser players, but players that fit a little bit better. Maybe you get more of a shooter in here, more of a strict 3-and-D guy. Yeah, they can't win a game like he did against Brooklyn or some of the shorthanded games against the Sixers this year. And I think that they're going to explore that avenue again, right? But they also could let him expire off their books, and they could get a lot next season, depending on what the plan is moving forward. So ultimately, I think whatever they decide to do with Tobias, I think it'll be okay. I don't think they're going to go out of their way to trade him, because frankly, I bet you they've had deals available for him for a long time, but they've just decided, no, we'd rather keep this guy. He's a good player. He's an imperfect player. Sure, he's making a bit too much money, but we're over the cap anyway. Let's keep him around. So that's kind of how I look at it. I think they're in an okay spot with him, but I definitely think there is a greater chance than ever that he gets dealt this offseason just because of the contract. It's easier. Other teams will be more interested in him.
Rich, ideally for you, of the candidates that we're hearing, and there could always be a dark horse, somebody we're not hearing, whatever. And I'm sure, though, they've had a conversation with Jay Wright. I don't think Jay Wright wants any parts of this. But anyway, ideally, who would it be for you of the names that we've heard?
They're all interesting names, guys. Again, with the coaching stuff, I think you can talk yourself into any of these guys, and I think you can talk yourself out of any of these guys. It's an impressive list of coaches. I think part of it depends, is Harden still here? Because if he's not, then it's okay, maybe Nick Nurse or somebody would be a little more interesting. I think him and Joel would get along. He'd do kind of creative defensive stuff, those type of things. The guy who I generally think, if Harden is here, or if they're able to get something else for him, for some reason I've always really liked Monty Williams. I really have been impressed. First off, he has a good relationship with Joe. Joe said it after the Game 7, because Monty's firing was the night before the Sixers lost. Yep. And, they were kind of talking in generalities, but Monty Williams was an assistant under Brett. I believe it was the Jimmy year. I believe it was 2018-19. He was here. He certainly is just a great leader. Obviously, if you've seen the stuff after his wife died, just the type of man he is super impressive guy, just a great leader. But, and here's the real reason I would want him. And Doc made a very good point about this. Doc always would say, that's what people say about African-American coaches, that, great leader, players coach, whatever, that type of thing. But Doc was right about this. Monty runs great stuff, man. He runs like a pick and roll offense. The Suns, beautiful ball movement. Now, he had the players to do it. He had Chris Paul, and Devin Booker's a great off-ball guy. But, man, that thing, before KD got there and they had it going, they won 64 games the year before. They had that thing singing. The ball was moving all over the place. So I really think he's an impressive guy. His issue is that they've flamed out of the playoffs the last couple of years, right? That's been – and it's kind of similar to Doc, where –
we already have that.
Yeah, they had that. So he's kind of an impressive guy, because I also – think having somebody who Joel likes is important, right? I don't know what those other guys would do. I don't know if Joe would have a relationship with Mike Budenholzer, who's a good coach. I think Nick Nurse would be a fun one, because he's been kind of Joel's antagonist for most of his career, but they have this guy, Dan Burke, who's been their assistant coach for a long time, and Joel used to not like him, and now they got along friendly after it's over. So I think that would be kind of an interesting pairing. I don't think Nick Nurse offensively is as creative as maybe some people are pretending like the Raptors, their offense has been pretty bad since Kawhi Leonard has gone. It's an impressive list, guys. And then, I don't think they would hire Sam Cassell, but I certainly know he is, like, especially if you bring Harden back, he's very popular with James Harden. He was James Harden's basically like his, I wouldn't say development coach, because that's kind of more for younger players, right? That's like James Harden has certainly developed his game to whatever level, but he was his individual coach, had a really good relationship with him and Maxey. And if you wanted to keep the rest of the staff, which I think it is a pretty good staff overall, you could do that as well. So there are a lot of ways they could go. I think that is less important, obviously, though, than what's James Harden doing here this year. Like, I think all of those options, you could definitely talk yourself into them. And for the Sixers, having a fresh voice, I think is fair. Frank Vogel, I'm not sure I see that one. He's more of a defensive coach, but again, you could talk yourself into all of these guys. Most of these guys have even had more playoff success than Doc has. So,
Rich, I don't want to be the typical fan, but I'm going to say this, and I want to hear your response. Everything we've talked about this week, everything we've talked about with you over the past half hour, this could turn out to be a disaster for next season. A disaster. Am I overstating the case?
You mean if Harden leaves?
If Harden leaves, if the right coach is not brought in, they're handcuffed. They can't do much to improve this roster to help Joel out if Harden does leave.
And then Joel maybe wants out after.
And maybe Joel wants out, or he plays next season pouting because he's stuck here. This could be a disaster.
Definitely could be. And I guess the one thing I would say, Derek, is that I do think Daryl Morey is pretty good at his job. Like, I do think whatever you want to say about him, he's been pretty good at averting disaster over his career. Like, he got James Harden way back when without tanking. Like, I forget who the Rockets owner, I think it was Les Alexander before Fertitta. That guy just didn't want to tank. So he found a way to kind of just tread water and gain all these assets for years to get Harden. But I agree with you. Like, I think things certainly could turn out poorly. Now, there are a lot of balls in the air, and it doesn't necessarily have to turn out that way. But Is it absolutely a possibility? Yes. I don't think you're necessarily, you don't have to be a fan to foresee that. I think a lot of people in NBA circles have been whispering, "Ooh, man, that could go," like, or whatever. And the NBA, those circles are very gossipy. They're very like, what's the next star who's going to be unhappy? No, it's not just fans who have said that. So it's not 100%, but it's certainly possible for sure. So we'll see.
Rich, appreciate it, man. I feel like we're in like the first chapter of what's going to be a very long, book this off season. But thanks for a couple minutes today. Thank you.
Okay, guys. See you.
Thank you.
You got it. That is Rich Hofmann from The Athletic, Sixers writer. You can follow him on Twitter at Rich_Hofmann. Gunnar, I'm kind of left having the same feeling that, we had when you and I were discussing this in the first segment. You can go a million different ways, and I feel like most of them aren't great. If I'm being frank, and only if there's some serious GMing done to get out of this mess by Daryl Morey. And that's why you brought him in, and that's why you pay him the big bucks, but he's got a tough job in front of him.
Are you confident he can do it? I mean, we applaud. Now, let's go back to last summer before the season. We applauded the moves he made. And again, I said it earlier in the show, and I'll reiterate it again. We applauded the moves, the depth. They're bringing in a pit bull mentality like Tucker for defensive purposes and for leadership purposes. We felt they strengthened the bench. Yep. They won 54 games, the most wins they've had since the 2000-2001 season, but it all unraveled at the most crucial time of the season. Now we've talked about how hamstrung they are. Keith Pompey puts out there, the rumor we've started hearing Christmas Day about Harden wanting to go back to Houston is now picking up steam. Embiid's unhappy that Doc has been fired. There's no way they can improve the roster enough to make this what we perceive to be a better team, to put a better supporting cast around him. Are you confident Morey can perform a magic act and pull us off?
Yeah, it's a great question. Hey, the odds from Odds Shark of James Harden's next team: Rockets -125. They're the favorite.
Jeez.
Sixers +400. Suns plus 700, Clippers plus 1,200, Lakers plus 800, et cetera, et cetera.
Jeez.
So the Rockets are the odds-on favorite by a pretty decent margin there, Gunner. So it's kind of where we're at, man.
When Vegas puts it out there, they, like we always say, they know something that the general consensus doesn't know.
Correct. Couldn't agree more. Could not agree more. All right, let's come back. Let's talk some birds when we get back. Jason Kelce had some interesting things to say based on this year being a little bit more of a challenge. And I have some numbers to back that up, Derek, which we'll get into when we come back. We're going to have Scott Lauber at 1:30 to talk some Phillies. At 2 o'clock, Derek, we'll do our NFL segment. We're going to hit a couple different things. One, AFC power rankings 1 through 5. We did the NFC yesterday. Also, division winners from last year that are most vulnerable to taking a step back. Okay. We will hit that for the AFC and the NFC. So we'll do all that when we return. Don't go anywhere. He's Derek. I'm Rob. We're Sports Take, JAKIB Sports YouTube Network. Let's talk about Jim Murray and Principal Financial Group, because look, finding that right person can be a challenge, but it's also critical. And I found the right person, and I want you to find that right person too. And that's Jim Murray and Principal Financial Group. Whether it's 401k review, you may not be happy with your insurance, you have a small business, you're trying to get your employee benefits off the ground. Any of these things apply and then some. I mean, look, if you're not even sure, just give them a call. But I know I've entrusted my IRA, my 401k rollover with Jim. I couldn't be any happier. You will be too. Give him a call, 610-996-4751, 610-996-4751. You could also email him, Murray, Murray, .Jim@principal.com. That's Murray.Jim